Hello and welcome. I'm Katie Yates, Public Relations Specialist at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Today we will be talking about scouting and preparing for your spring turkey hunt. I'm joined today by three MDIFW staff members and avid turkey hunters, turkey and other game bird biologist Kelsey Sullivan, retired rec safety coordinator Reggie Reed, and Fisheries Resource Supervisor Liz Thorndike. For those watching at home, be sure to type in your questions into the chat box and we'll field audience questions at the end of our discussion. And just a reminder, this conversation is recorded, so you can watch again at any time. So I think first of all, Kelsey, when we're thinking about scouting for turkeys, it's probably important to understand what wild turkeys are up to this time of year. So what kind of behavior should hunters expect from spring turkeys?
Yep, that's a good question, and it's going to change from today and up until the beginning of the season. But typically, when I think of this time of year, it's winter flocks starting to break up a little bit, and maybe so, but and the flock dynamics are changing. So jakes are kind of going away from the bigger flocks, and toms and hens are kind of sticking together. Hens being adult female turkeys, and then jennies, juvenile female turkeys. So in general, where you see birds now doesn't necessarily mean that's where they're going to be on May 3rd when the season starts. They're, like I said, they're breaking up. Females are kind of running the show now. They're starting by mid-April. They're going to be where they're going to nest, and that a lot of times doesn't mean where you see them now. We have some radio telemetry data that shows some females up to 28 miles from where they were in the wintertime, which is pretty cool. But some are also a mile away, so you never know. A farm that's got all kinds of food resources, they may breed and nest and winter in the same place. So, but I would say expect by scouting time, which would be mid-April, real serious scouting, that you're going to see strutting, potential mating. You're going to see toms and females together, groups of jakes kind of separated, but maybe in the same general area. But you'll see, in general, more of a mating behavior. You'll see more strutting in the morning, but not necessarily. You can see it all times during the day. A lot of folks ask about sunny days and if turkeys are out more, and I wouldn't say they're necessarily out more, because I've seen turkeys in fields foraging on nice rainy days, but they tend to be more active and more keyed up and displaying. The males are displaying more and strutting on nice sunny days, warm days in the sun. So there's a lot going on with turkeys, I guess, but it's all rotating around mating and pre-nesting and reproduction, different from what winter flocks were, where it's all a big group of birds. So I guess that's kind of in general what I'd expect now and through the start of the season.
Great, thank you. And Liz, if someone is looking for a place to go turkey hunting, what are some options for them?
Thanks, Katie. So there's actually quite a few options out there. The department owns over 100,000 acres of land and wildlife management areas. And I think Katie can, in the chat there, drop a link. The department actually recently just made a pretty cool interactive map. It shows all the places in the state that the department owns land, how to access it, what's there. Also, check your local land trust. Some of the local land trusts have land that they allow hunting on. Bureau of Parks and Lands, they own a lot of land as well. And if you're looking at private land, start now, think ahead, ask permission. There's a couple of different ways you can find out who owns land. I would say, some people like to go to town offices, maybe look at tax maps. Some people have, there's phone apps, Onyx Hunt. You can see, who might be the landowner. Also, for as big as Maine is, it's a pretty small community. So, if you're looking at a field and there's a house nearby and you stop, they may not own it, but there's a good chance they might know who does own it, can help point you in the right direction. So, always ask permission. Be conscious with COVID. If you are going to knock on a door, be courteous, knock on the door, maybe take a step back off the steps. And then if you do get permission, it's really important to be a good steward while you're on the land. So ask where to park. You know, you don't want to block any roads or park anywhere that's inconvenient to the landowner. If they give you permission to maybe drive up a woods road and it's muddy, you know, maybe it's best to park and not walk up the muddy road. If it's a farmer and there's gates, you know, always leave a gate as you found it. If it's an open gate, leave it open. If it's closed, leave it closed. If there's livestock, you know, ask the farmer which fields are okay to hunt in, which ones are okay to set up in. And just to tell you a quick story about, I grew up in New York turkey hunting with my dad, and so we'd saw these birds roost, and we'd set up that morning in the dark. We knew there was a field there, so we're setting up on the edge of the field. And we're in a ground blind, and as the light's coming up, we're seeing these big objects out in the field. And I'm like, oh, what the heck is that? And as it gets lighter, we realize they're cows, and the cows are getting closer and closer. And they're coming up and they're licking the ground blind and kind of biting it because they think we're a hay bale. We set up in a pasture, but the night before the cows weren't out there, they got put out. So, you know, try to ask the landowner, where's a good place for you to set up? And in the end, the turkeys were in the field with us, but we couldn't see anything through the cows. So also, if you do get permission, say thank you, be appreciative. We're very fortunate to have as much private land open to the public as we do in the state of Maine. So, you know, make sure you say thank you, ask permission every year. Always have a plan A and B, just because, you know, you may not be the only person hunting. So if you do get someplace and there's already somebody there, it's good to have another idea where to go. So look at a couple different options. Don't just focus on one area.
Thanks so much, Liz. That's a great story. We did post those links in the comments, so you can check some of those out. So Kelsey, I know that our conversation is really going to revolve around turkey sign. So before we kind of get into that, can you explain a little bit about what turkey sign is and what a hunter might be looking for? Oh, Kelsey, I think you're muted.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, sure. When I think of turkey sign, or people think of turkey sign, it's a visual thing, but that isn't the whole story. There's an auditory sound sign too, and I think of that as well. But in terms of visual sign, turkeys are pretty much vegetarians, other than young poults, which are young turkeys eating insects during July and August to build fat reserves. But so their turkeys are looking for acorns that are on the ground, seeds, basically things that have dropped over the last fall, overwintered. So they're scratching under leaves and different, you know, sticks and things like that. So one really good sign for turkey is to be out in the woods at the forest edge, especially because they gravitate towards sort of sunny areas. Those are more open. They open up earlier in the winter or in the spring as the snow melts. But you're looking for an area where there's, and it could be a pretty big patch. It could be 10 feet long by 3 feet wide of just scratched up earth, leaves kind of churned and rotated over. And then, so that's good sign, but you also have to keep in mind that deer do something similar. So they scratch too. So you're going to want to look for footprints, turkey tracks, if you can find mud that has the classic 3-prong turkey foot. And then if you see that, then you know it's probably turkey and not deer. If you see deer tracks and no turkey, then you have to question that. But you can also tell if it's turkey by their scat. So turkeys have a distinct looking, and we went over this. This is a good description, is a brown and white cheese puff. And it's, you can tell the sexes by the shape of the cheese puff or the swirl. And females, it's sort of curly, kind of a coil, and males, it's sort of a loose kind of a J. So you see that, then you know turkeys are around. So that's a good visual sign. Another good sign is like I said, I like to listen for turkeys too, and I think that's a great way of thinking of it as a sign of turkey, because you go out early in the morning, a week or two before the season starts, and when I say early, I mean 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Don't necessarily have to do that all the time, but that's probably prime time, between 4:30 and 5:30, and you'll hear turkeys gobbling on the roost. So big, loud turkey gobbling. I'm sure you know what a gobble sounds like, but if you haven't, go online and just, you know, YouTube turkey gobbling early morning or something, and you'll find it. But they're up in trees, up in roost trees, typically at the edges of fields or openings. So go to places like that and listen. So those are two good signs that I look for.
Thank you. Reggie, I know that we were just talking about that you've been hunting turkey a long time. What are some considerations that you take when scouting, and what is something that you're looking for on the landscape?
Okay, so I'm looking for flock activity, and either jot down the location or make a mental note, because those are some of the areas that I want to go back and frequent. The checking the roost trees. Anybody that's good with a compass can take a compass bearing and actually walk, if they have permission, landowner permission to access that property, and walk to the roost tree and kind of see where these birds are roosting. Listening, as Kelsey said, it's extremely important to get out there early in the morning. And I just want to make a note that yesterday was the first day that I actually went out and actually scouted. It was a very foggy morning. The birds, I find, are not giving up their location with that weather condition. So calling, now I'm talking locator calls, whether it be a barred owl or an owl call or a crow call or a peacock call, or there are a number of different calls that can be made to get them to shot gobble. But that's what I'm looking for when I go out.
Great, thank you. And shot gobbling, you mean you're trying to kind of scare them? Is that what you mean, Reggie?
Yeah. So like somebody coming up behind you and hitting the crow call so loud that it makes you jump. The turkeys, in my opinion, want to gobble, and I'm just giving them a reason to gobble.
They're just looking for any reason to get going. So we're going to be talking more about calls in next week's panel. This is a whole series, this panel discussion series about turkey hunting. So make sure that you check our schedule. We'll post a link for that in the comments, and you can tune in next week. We're going to be talking about turkey gear and turkey calling. And I'm sure I hope Reggie will do some demonstrations for us, because we always rely on Reggie to do calling demonstrations and teaching that. So Liz, do you have anything to add to that? What do you keep in mind when you're scouting?
Yeah, I'd say my biggest thing when I'm scouting is just lots of options. I don't like to cement myself into one location. So and start early. Like Reggie said, he just went, and I think that's great. And it's kind of hard not to start thinking about getting out hunting with all this warm weather. But you can start now, and maybe by May 3rd, I think Kelsey said is opening day, that the birds may not be there, but don't not think about that spot again. Maybe by the end of May, those birds might be utilizing that area again. So I think you could start now, but you want to keep scouting, whether that's a couple times a week or weekly, and keep all those locations in mind, because birds do move, and they may not be there one day or 1 week, but they very likely might come back to those spots. And Reggie touched on a locator call, and that's my preference too. You don't want to call too much, especially with a turkey call. So it's pretty easy to, inexpensive calls, crows or owl calls are a really good way to not give up that really you're a human, or they're just, turkeys are very unsuspecting of locator calls. So we don't need to make turkeys any smarter than they already are.
We're going to talk more about how smart turkeys are later in this conversation. So Reggie, and I know that you've been teaching a lot of people, because you worked in rec safety for so long, and you take out a lot of young people. Is turkey hunting a good place to start for new hunters? Absolutely.
It's a good opportunity to get the people in the outdoors, to learn what turkey hunting is all about. It's very interactive. It's great when you can make a call and have the turkey respond. Um, it also is an opportunity for safety, whether you're hunting with a shotgun or a bow or a crossbow. It is an opportunity to actually be in the field hunting, and it's a very controlled hunt, as you have the person usually right beside you, unless you're using some different tactics. But yeah, no, it's a very good opportunity for young and old people to get into.
And tick safety too, I think, is probably something for people who are new to turkey hunting to keep in mind.
Oh, absolutely. Safety is a real concern. Naturally, the birds display, and they are red, white, and blue, black. So these are colors that we like to avoid when we're turkey hunting, because we're usually wearing a face mask or face paint, and some form of a camo. And yeah,
Yeah, so I think that if you're wearing dark colors, it's obviously going to be difficult to see ticks. And so, you know, it's important to do tick checks on yourself, have a lint roller after you've been out in the woods, and check your hairline, check the base of your neck, anywhere where your clothing is around your skin, just kind of being vigilant. But I know that, or in treating your clothes with permethrin obviously is another route you can take. And some parts of the state experience this more than others, but no one likes pulling ticks out of their hair when they're out in the woods.
yeah, I think, you know, each time anybody ventures in the outdoor these days, they should take tick precautions. Yeah, so safety naturally is a big component, whether it be your health or whether it be with the equipment you're using.
Liz, I know that you actually have a good story about your taking your son out turkey hunting and introducing him to it.
Yeah, so I think, you know, growing up in New York, turkey hunting was a really big part of my life, and it was something I did a lot with my dad and my brothers. But so I was really excited when my son was old enough to not only start coming, but to carry a gun and potentially shoot a bird. And one of the very first hunts I took him on, it was almost just serendipity, just this big lone tom all by himself, just coming right across the field, gobbling, strutting, you know, doing everything, you know, right out of a video. And my son, I could feel him start to shake, you know, he's just so excited listening to the bird. And, you know, we had a decoy out, and I just told him, you know, let him come. And I'll tell you when you can shoot. And he was ready. But as the turkey got closer and closer, I'm sure it felt like an eternity, he started just fidgeting. And I'd explained to him how well turkeys can see, like, don't do that. And so I was like, hold still. And he just keeps fidgeting. And finally he fidgeted so much as the gun had fallen off his knee, and the turkey broke strut, immediately picked its head right up and just took off running. And so I turned to my son and I said, what are you doing? And he goes, I just got so excited. And so, I mean, I think he was only 7 or 8 at the time, but I mean, just watching him watch this bird was probably one of my favorite hunts. And he wasn't successful that year. He was last year, but I mean, I think it's such an interactive sport that I think a lot of people really enjoy it, and it can become pretty addicting when you hear a turkey gobble and interact and come strutting in. So yeah, that was a pretty fun hunt.
And actually, Liz, you introduced the commissioner. Well, you took her out for her successful turkey hunt, I think, right?
Yes, I feel like that was like a famous hunt I've been on now. But yes, I took Judy Camuso on a turkey hunt, and that was another. I think, like, if I look back at all my hunts, other than my first turkey hunt that I was successful on with my dad, all my other favorite turkey hunts have been when I've taken somebody else hunting, and so that was another one that I wouldn't say it's above the hunt where my son was successful, but it ranks pretty high.
So you take a lot of people out and you go out turkey hunting yourself. Actually, all different kinds of hunting, I know. But so what are some of your I guess your insider scoop? What are you looking for on the landscape? You touched on it a little bit, but is there any other things that you want to add for people at home who might be new, or maybe they've gone out before and they haven't been successful?
Yeah, so I think something that I like to do, and I guess I kind of gave it away when we were talking last week, but I like to go out the night before. So we talked about pre-scouting, and you go out and you get permission, and you kind of have all these ideas of where to go, where you may have seen turkeys, or where you might have land that you can hunt. But what I like to do is go out the night before, drive around right around sunset, and you'll either see the turkeys in the field. So right away, if you see turkeys right around sunset, they're going to be roosting nearby. And if you have permission to hunt there, that's a good place to start because the turkeys are already there. And then also, if you don't see turkeys, but it's maybe someplace you could hunt, I'll use a locator call. And if they're already roosted, they'll respond. And then if they're already roosted, as long as nothing spooks them, where they are. So, but a key thing to keep in mind is if you know where birds are roosted or where they might be, you got to be very careful going in the morning because you can bump them out of roost trees. They pick roost trees. They're smart birds, so they'll pick trees where they can see you coming. So don't think that you're going to sneak up to a roost tree or sneak up on a bird in a roost. They'll fly out of the roost tree, or they'll see you come in and set up, and then as soon as daylight, they'll fly in the exact opposite direction, and you never see them again. So those are some things I like to do.
Thank you so much. So Reggie, what are some techniques that you have for picking a good spot to set up? And we'll talk a little bit more maybe next week, and we can get into it today about whether or not you use a blind or you don't use a blind. But as far as the spot that you're going to set up, what are some things for people at home to keep in mind? What do you keep in mind?
Okay, so I'll compliment Liz on her driving around just before dark and locating the birds. That's the point that I will be making a decision on where I will set up. I've fallen to this many times is setting up so that I'm facing east. So when the sun comes up, it's great if you can get the birds in before the sun comes up, but if you can't, it can be a real issue. So I take that into consideration. I take other people approaching into consideration. So if there's other people that have permission to hunt on this property, or if it's public land, I want to try to make sure that I have a good view of anybody else that might be approaching. Also, a good background, a tree at least as wide as your shoulders, or an area that is a bank, anything that will give you a good background. So and I know you said we'll talk later on the ground blinds and stuff, but if you are preparing a blind or leaving any equipment, make sure it's labeled. Going early, getting in there and walking in, the use of lights, whether it be a green or red. So I know the wife doesn't like walking through stone walls and old barbed wire fences, or going through a brook. But these are some of the things that you may encounter, and you need to take those into consideration when you're looking to set up. Watch where the birds are. The birds are going to continue. Some still you can pattern that they'll be in a field at a certain time. So I think that is pretty much what you need to consider. And if you think it's a good spot, chances are somebody else has also thought so. And why I say this is sometimes you may think you have the best spot. The birds are hollering, they're coming in, and all of a sudden they get to the location where you are, and they start folding their wings and getting very nervous, and away they go. So I think they imprint very well on where there has been danger. So just be aware of that. So when you do set up, you try to set up for success naturally.
Liz, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, Reggie hit a lot of key points. Something I always think about is who am I hunting with? So if I'm hunting with my son, Mr. Ants in his pants, I kind of bring a blind now. If it's just me, I prefer to kind of walk and call, but so if it's just me and I'm setting up in the woods, I like to pick a tree that's big enough to cover me, kind of my shadow. So that way, if I do make any movements, maybe I'm picking up a gun, or using a call, the tree is directly behind me, kind of covering any movement that I might make. But I think wearing camouflage is key. If you don't have camouflage, try to pick dark colors. Don't pick red, white, or blue. Turkeys can see color, and they'll pick up on you, but you don't want them to see you. And then, you want to be very, very still, as I kind of alluded with my son's story, because turkeys have incredible eyesight. So, I think putting a little forethought, even ahead of turkey hunting day, where you can set up, whether it be, where you could put a blind or trees or stumps that you might be able to sit against it is a good idea.
Great, thank you. And Kelsey, so I kind of alluded to this earlier. Turkeys don't actually strike me as being very bright. And I've mentioned this in probably past panel discussions. I have guinea fowl at home and they don't strike me as very bright. So I take all these precautions. What is it that turkeys have that keep them aware of what's happening and wary of hunters?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. When you think of turkeys and intelligence, they're intelligent for the surroundings that they're in because they're pretty adaptable and pretty prolific. So if that's a measure of intelligence, then I would think they're pretty smart birds because there's lots of them and they do survive well. But so that's basically touching on what they've adapted for the pressures that they experience. And there's quite a number of predators that pursue them. Coyote, fox, and at different life stages when they're younger, aerial predators, owls, and things like that can get them. But so they've adapted well to be perceptive to what's around them, and they've developed really, really strong eyesight. So they pick up on minor movements, and they also have really good hearing. So when you think of it in the context of you being out there in the environment with them, you want to be still and you want to be camoed, as everybody's referenced. They can see color. So they're really, when you look at a turkey's eye, it's huge. And that is an adaptation to really good eyesight and seeing what's around them. So they can catch at the corner of their eye something moving that could be a coyote. So they're ready to respond and get out quickly. So those are really good things to keep in mind, being still and being inconspicuous.
Great, thank you. So Reggie, if someone is new to hunting, what are some first steps for them?
Okay, so if they've never been hunting, I would suggest that they accompany somebody for the first time on a hunting trip. This will expose them to all the excitement and being patient, which I don't know about the rest of the panel, but I still get very excited when that Tom comes in and spitting and drumming. So then after that, if a person goes through the process of taking a hunter ed or getting an apprentice license to get their turkey permit, which is a real deal because you have both spring and fall to hunt. The next would be not to overgun, not to have a firearm that is too big for the person's frame. So I wouldn't let a 10-year-old fire a 12 gauge, for example. Number one, he or she may not want to hunt again. The safety aspect of it, to emphasize, we are trying to stay concealed. We're making turkey noises, and not everybody plays by the rules. So turkey hunting can be very dangerous, but it's a very safe sport if everybody follows the rules. Hunter ed is certainly an opportunity, and if anybody has a chance to patent their shotgun, it's also a way to show the proper handling of a firearm. Join your local clubs, whether it be a fish and game club, whether it be a national organization such as the National Wild Turkey Federation, Backcountry Hunter. They're more than willing to help people out, get people started in the outdoor activity. We also have, it's not illegal here in the state of Maine to have motion decoys or use electronic calls, which I know we'll cover later. But there are some practices on, I referenced in one of our meetings, stalking. And when I say stalking, I mean trying to sneak up on a bird or to work towards a bird. And I believe they now call that reaping and fanning, so that they can get closer to the bird. It's not illegal here in the state, but it's something that has to be done with, you really have to know where you are and what your surroundings are. And again, we go back to safety. Some people leave a little post-it on their vehicle, turkey hunter in area. Others use the blaze orange triangle, hunter in area. Remember, a lot of people are hunting from blinds or a blind area. And it's very important that we are watching for that as hunters.
Hey, Liz, do you have any other groups that you know of that people can join?
Yeah, so I think, Reggie just gave a lot of great ideas and examples, but I think in today's world, we're pretty fortunate, with social media. Say fortunate, not always, but I think, I've seen it. I think we're all seeing it. Women in the outdoors is certainly growing, and that's great. And so I think sometimes it can be intimidating for women who maybe, unlike me, didn't grow up with such a strong family orientation. So I think on Facebook, there's a lot of groups, a lot of other social media outlets specifically surrounding women in the outdoors. And it's a great place that, women should feel comfortable, asking questions or reaching out to people, and same for men as well. But there's a lot of different social media, pages that you could turn to if you're looking kind of for any advice, or I wouldn't even be surprised if you asked somebody, have to go out, that somebody wouldn't jump on and say that it would take you.
Yeah, and certainly, turning to registered Maine guides, that is a great resource for people. We can post the link to help you find a registered Maine guide. There's a landing page for that so that you can find the guide to help you with the activity that you're interested in. And I'm also going to give a pitch for our Next Step hunting programs. We can post the link for those. There's actually a turkey patterning, they're not really workshops, but they're days that you can shoot at the range, at the Summer Haven range in Augusta, and get some help from our staff and SROs on how to pattern your shotgun for turkey season. And we also have a blind setup course and some other turkey hunting opportunities, and the rest of these panel discussions on that page. So I am going to get into some of the questions here. I want to remind everybody at home that you can ask your questions in the chat. And we've got some time left, so I'm going to go ahead and start asking some of them. The first one that I have is, and I'm kind of going to wrap up a couple of questions into this, which is, can turkeys see red or green lights? And we also mentioned a little bit, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about what colors turkeys can see. Kelsey, do you want to take this one?
Yep, I'll take it, and I may not have all the answers. I'm not sure if they can see the whole spectrum, but I would assume, I think they can see red and green. They tom turkeys attract females from fanning, but also their, as a lot of people know, their head inflates and turns these bright blue and red colors, and so I would expect that you wouldn't want to be, if you're hunting, not to have red and green lights visible to turkeys.
And they can't, they're very patriotic. They can see red, white, and blue, right? So the next one is, do you have to roost the turkeys the night before? Maybe Liz, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so no, you don't have to. I'd say if you have time, and maybe if you only know that you can hunt, say before work or the first couple hours in the morning, then I would recommend trying to roost, only because it'll kind of help you focus in on where the birds may be, and hopefully increase your odds of being successful. But by all means, you don't have to. And I think if the night before I'm not successful in finding any birds, usually what I'll do is either maybe go to one or two of my favorite places and sit down, listen. If I don't hear anything, then start driving around and maybe see if I see anything, or just try, different locations, my A, B, and C. But no, you don't have to. But I'd say it could certainly increase your odds if you already know where they are, but doesn't mean you'll be successful, and you definitely don't have to.
So there's another good question, and it's, I guess, related to the trees. What tree species should you be looking for? Kelsey or Liz, do you have any thoughts? Do they prefer a certain type of tree for roosting or for food or something along those lines?
Sure, I'll jump in. White pine are pretty key for roosting. Large trees with big canopy. I've seen them roost in oak trees and things like that too. So large trees on the edges of fields and openings, I think, are key. But white pine are really a good roosting tree, and you can often find turkeys using white pine.
Liz, have you had any experiences or thoughts on which trees work better for you?
I'd say I do agree with Kelsey. I think white pine, I've noticed the most for roosting, but I'd say any tree that's big with big limbs, they really, they like to go up. But I've also seen turkeys in some smaller trees. Sometimes they do some funny things, but I think, you'll notice when you're out on the landscape, walking along a field, and all of a sudden, you see one of those big, beautiful trees, whether it's a pine or an oak or a maple, and it has those big limbs that kind of go out horizontal before they swoop up. Turkeys are using those because they're comfortable, and they frequently give them an advantage to see a long ways and to see any predators, such as humans walking up the edge of a field in the middle of the night. They'll pick up on that, so they're picking roost trees to their advantage.
Great, thank you. So I had a question come in. I had two male toms walking through my yard. Are they territorial in the mating season? And if so, then why are they together? Kelsey, I might be looking at you for this one.
Sure. Yeah, when you think of turkeys, they're gregarious by nature most of the time. So they like to be in the company of others, likely for predator aversion. So you have a friend next to you, the chances of you getting nabbed are half because your friend has also the same chances. But that being said, they are territorial. There's probably a fine window where they're not amenable to real tight company, and that's right when they're keyed up to mating. So right now you'd see them grouped together, and then after the mating season you'd see them grouped together. And then if you watch them, when they're really focused on mating and breeding, they'll attack each other. So you might have two that are really friendly, and then a female gets introduced to the picture, they can be aggressive towards each other. So on any given day, they could be agitated or keyed up for mating, and they may not be as friendly to their buddy that they've been hanging out with all winter and also through the summer.
Thank you. So we will talk more about decoys and gear in our next week's panel discussion, but there are some questions coming in, so I'm happy to kind of dive into that a little bit, but just a reminder that next week we'll be talking about it more. So Reggie, maybe this is a good question for you. Do you always have to use a decoy? And if you are using one, is it better to use like a tom decoy or a hen decoy?
Okay, you don't have to always use a decoy. In fact, it's a lot more fun. If you're in the hardwoods, for example, and you got the bird coming through looking to see where the hen is. Using the decoy, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to call the tom to the hen? Personally, I like to use the breeding hen decoy. It seems to be, if I only had one to go to, that would be the one. As far as a tom decoy or a jake, you are introducing that intimidation, especially the pecking order of the birds in the area. So to answer the first part of the question, no, you don't always have to use a decoy.
Liz, thoughts? Tom decoys, hen decoys, what's your favorite?
My go-to is a hen, and honestly, you don't need a decoy. If you're in a field, probably a good idea, just because you're trying to get them within shooting distance. But if you're in the woods, you don't need one, and sometimes that's kind of the fun of it. If you're in the woods and you're sitting up against a tree and you're calling, and the turkey's coming in, they're looking, they can hear your call, and they're looking for the hen. So they're naturally just kind of getting closer and closer to the call. We'll get into it next week, but as they get closer, you call quieter, so they keep coming. I would point out, though, once this happened, one time when I was with my son, so we had a turkey coming in, a tom all by himself, and I didn't have time to set up a decoy, and he was shooting a 20 gauge. And so the turkey kind of hung up. He was right there, and he's just looking around, gobbling, 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 and he knew we were there. He knew that this hen was here, but he couldn't see it, and there was a down tree, and he just wouldn't cross over it. And so my son, with a smaller caliber gun, just couldn't, he didn't have a shot. And so I think in that instance, if that turkey did see a decoy, it would have been a little different, but I think every situation, every hunt is a little different. But if you only have one decoy, I would say, make it a hen decoy. And no matter if I'm hunting in a field or in the woods, I always have a hen with me, but I may not always use it, but I always have it there just in case.
So Kelsey, on the conversation of toms and hens, why is it that we can't kill hens in the spring?
Yep, that's a great question. So you got to back up and think about, we're actually hunting turkeys during the breeding season. So we're taking out individuals that, we time it so that we don't take out males that have already fertilized females. So turkeys are hunted, and there's lots of them, but we're also mandated to protect the species too. And taking out females is taking out potential individuals for the next year. So we're at the same time that we're trying to emphasize and allow for utilization of turkeys as a resource and for hunting, we also want to protect them for the future. So you take out females, you're taking out all the potential young that they could have raised that summer into the next fall, into the next year.
So Reggie, do you try to locate just toms or hens too in the spring?
Usually if you locate the tom, there'll be a hen in the area. In fact, a lot of times, if you work towards a roost tree, you may very well bust the hens. They always seem to be on. They seem to be quiet while the toms are doing their gobbling. So, yeah, that's what I've found. Usually they're together. Occasionally you'll find a single tom. Boy, when you do, game on, because that's when it's a lot of fun, especially if you can see the roost tree, watch them fly out, work them up to you. But yeah, I had a perfect example. I patented the birds for a solid week. There was one tom and 3 jakes and a number of hens. Youth day. So I took a youth hunter out. We got there early. I used my red light, and I might clarify that red and green, that it's a very, very a dull light. It's not something that I'm shining up in the trees. I'm just looking to see that I can pick my way into the blind. Got in there, got the youth in there, and heard the hens. Now, I had patented these birds for a week, and there was a male bird in that tree every single evening. Youth day, the hens flew down. There wasn't a male to be found. So even if you have it well planned, it doesn't mean that you're going to. So in this case, it was all hens. Not something that I expected, nor have I seen since, but it does happen.
Great, thank you. Liz, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Reggie said, if you see a hen, eventually there's going to be a jake or a tom there. I mean, hens just don't go unnoticed. It is mating season. So I think, as Reggie said, the best thing is when you can find a lone tom, and usually at some point, they will be alone. A lot of times you might see, a group of jakes. They're always something to kind of keep in the back of your mind too. But I'd say if you see turkeys, remember it, because where there's one, there's more.
They definitely like to hang out together. I know that I was chatting with one of our staff members yesterday who'd never gone turkey hunting before, and she was talking about how she'd kind of gotten all of the things together to go turkey hunting, but she had not gotten a blind. Liz, what do you think? Do you need to hunt with a blind?
No, you don't need to. I'd say for adults, it's probably easier to get away without a blind. I'd say if you're going to have kids with you, unless it's a very dedicated, patient kid, you might want to have a blind. You don't need one. And, there's other things instead of a full blind. There's some other tools you can buy to kind of help conceal your legs. But I think the key is to just hold really still. So you can get away without a blind if you can sit really still. I think that would just be the key.
I will note that it's very hard to sit still, even for adults, because it's very cold out there. And I was shivering last time I went.
Yeah, and
I was moving.
Yeah, and by the end of the season, when the black flies start to come out and they're crawling up under your hat, sometimes it is really helpful to have a blind. It allows a little more freedom, but they are expensive, so don't think you have to have one to get into this sport. That's not true.
And Reggie, and you touched on this a little bit, but how important is it to get out early in the season? Do the birds start to learn and become a little bit wary?
If people are using turkey calls, they certainly do. And if they're using the same call day after day, that's why when we cover next week and get into calls on why you might want to have 1 or 2 calls. But yes, I think the turkeys overcalling. The other thing I'd like to point out right here is that most everybody that there's a little pullout where they can stop and get out of the vehicle. gosh, people, don't stand there and try to use your locator calls. Walk down the road a little ways or walk out into the field, so that the call is not coming from the same exact location from me or another hunter or another hunter. I do think that they imprint and they have a tendency to ignore you, and that's been my experience.
Thanks, Reggie. So Kelsey, this question came in, and I'm wondering, you had mentioned earlier about how you might confuse the turkey scratching for deer. Do turkeys and deer compete for food?
That's a really good question. And the key there is competition. They both utilize a lot of food resources that are really abundant. And so there really isn't a competition for any one food source because they're utilizing the same and various food sources. So I would say no, they don't compete for that food resource because there's so much of it.
So maybe, and this might be just another good question for you, Kelsey, while I have you. Will turkeys notice the shine off of the gun barrel?
If it moves, if they're there and it moves, maybe. If you're still and they approach it, I would think that as long as you're not moving. So I would say it depends on movement, probably mostly, and yeah, the setting. But they would pick up on it definitely if you moved.
And I don't know, Kelsey, maybe this is a good question for you, but I can also turn to Reggie and Liz. So whoever, how far should you be from the sign that you find? So if you find some turkey sign, should you park it right there, or should you try to look for some other areas?
Oh, I guess that's a good question. I should put myself in that situation. If I came across turkey sign scouting, that I would probably, if I didn't see any birds that day, the next day I'd go to the same spot early and see if there's birds there in the morning. So, yeah, I would say that within that close proximity, the area, that is a good place to set up.
Reggie, Liz, anything to add? Reggie, I see you're ready to chat.
Yeah, Kelsey hit it right on the head. If I go to an area and I especially see a dusting area, that's the area that I want to concentrate on, because at some point in time, there'll be a turkey come and use that dusting area, and it's usually more than one. So it's an area that some of the toms oftenly frequent, and it might be an area that you'll see the strut zone, see where they're dragging their wings, walking back and forth. So absolutely, that's where I would try to set up.
Great. So a question just came in, and I kind of know the answer. Well, I don't really know the answer, but I have seen it. Will wild turkey ever hang out with domesticated fowl? Kelsey, what do you think?
Yes, they will. And it's more likely that domesticated fowl will hang out with wild turkey. That's my experience. It's not that wild turkey are jumping into the chicken coop or turkey coop, but we get reports a lot of domestic turkeys mingling with wild turkeys. So probably they will in your backyard maybe sometimes, but more so the case is that wildfowl or domestic birds have escaped and they're running around with a wild turkey group.
Great, thank you. And another question that just came in, I read some articles where hunters used a crow call first thing in the morning to get turkeys to answer. Has anyone tried this? I think, Reggie, this kind of goes back to what you were saying about shot calls.
Yeah, and we can certainly go over the shot calls or get them to shot gobble. But crow call is an excellent one. I like to be the first crow in the morning so that I can listen for the response. I really like getting out of the vehicle and hearing the turkeys gobble to a crow's calling. It means it might be a good day. But yeah, A crow call works extremely well. And again, I want the loudest crow call I can find, because when I blow on it, I want the turkey to shot gobble. Once the turkey shot gobbles, and I know he's in the area, then I can set up a plan to try to harvest that bird.
Great, thank you, Reggie. So I do have, I think, we don't have a whole lot of other questions coming in, and I can, if any others do sort of at the last minute, I can certainly ask them of our panelists, but maybe a good way to kind of wrap up this conversation, I'm going to ask each of you. Liz, what is your favorite part about turkey hunting?
I can tell you probably my least favorite part is getting up super early. But I do condition myself pre-turkey season, or try to, or maybe it's like late season black flies, I'm not sure. But I think there's so many of my favorite aspects of turkey hunting. I don't know how I would pick just one. But probably, near the top would be one, the interaction, not only watching these birds, but hearing them respond, and then, calling back. And it's just, it's such a, it's addicting. It's an adrenaline rush. Like Reggie said, he's been hunting for, I'm not going to tell you how long, because I don't know, but a long time, and he still gets excited. Every one of us still does, especially when they get close enough, when you hear them, spinning and drumming, and just that interaction. It's hard not to. But I think, one of my favorite things is taking somebody else out and watching them get just as excited and just as addicted to hunting turkeys as me. But really, I mean, and also getting out in the spring after a long winter and hearing all the birds in the forest again is really nice, especially after not hearing them or seeing them for so long. So just finally getting out into the woods after a long winter is nice too.
Okay, Reggie, you're up. You were just telling us a great story about turkey hunting and your permit. So what's your favorite part?
Well, my first permit was back in 1996, when they changed the zones. They had a north zone and south zone. I was very fortunate to draw the north zone, and so I was hunting birds with no pressure. It was a blast. I think Liz has hit it right on the head. The excitement, trying to make a soft call, if you're using a pot call or a slate, hand starts to get a little tense, and that little cluck and purr turns into a putt or a yelp. Yeah, it is that excitement, and it is the excitement that you see in other hunters. It's just the enthusiasm overall. That's what makes you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to drive to your favorite location. So yeah, it's the whole experience. You get hooked on it and you just can't let go.
Kelsey, we'll wrap up this conversation with you. Any final thoughts? Anything that you want to add to what was already said?
No, I would agree with Liz that, I like getting up early, but not that early. Like, I get conditioned, so I get used to it, like she said. But I think my favorite part, and like Liz and Reggie said, there's a lot into it. There's a lot of things you could say that are really exciting and your favorite part, because there's so many. But I like that being out early in the morning and waking up from silence to all that noise. And typically you wouldn't get yourself into that situation in any other time. Just getting out into the middle of the woods or out in the edge of a field and just waking up to all that noise and the spring coming in. So I think that's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's more about just spending time outside in the spring, hearing the birds call, looking around the landscape, seeing everything kind of come to life after winter. So even if you don't end up harvesting a bird, it's still a wonderful time to get outside and enjoy nature. And with turkey hunting, spring turkey hunting, it's a really fun, interactive experience, and there's tons of opportunities. So I hope everyone will join us next week for more. We touched on gear a little bit today, but a really in-depth conversation about what you really need to go turkey hunting, and then maybe some extra things that you don't really need, but really enhance your experience. I want to thank my panelists for joining us today and answering your questions. And if we didn't get to, I saw some questions kind of come in as we're wrapping up here. You can always join us next week and ask some of those questions of our panelists, who some of them will be back next week and then in our third week. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a great